2 days later, 1,000 militiamen and volunteers are issued arms and ammunition. They are ordered to oust the rebels from Montgomery's tavern. This time, it is Mackenzie's men who are waiting on Yonge Street. Half the rebels have firearms, the rest have only pikes and cudgels. The clash is brief. The rebels drop their weapons and flee.
Stand your ground! Stand your ground!
Militiamen and volunteers ransack Montgomery's tavern and put it to the torch. Mackenzie, along with some of his comrades, makes his way to the United States. But others are not so lucky. Samuel Lump and Peter Matthews are hanged in front of the Toronto jail 4 months later. The rebellion in Upper Canada has lasted less than a week. In Lower Canada, armed rebels prepare for one last stand in the county of Two Mountains, northwest of Montreal. On December 14, 1837, General John Colborne himself leads an expedition to the village of Saint-Eustache. Young Émilie Berthelot watches his arrival.
At 10 o'clock in the morning on a Thursday, a cold, clear, beautiful day, the English troops marched down the King's Road, 1,500 strong. Infantry, artillery, cavalry, the officers in full dress regalia. The entire parade filed by at a leisurely pace, with a kind of defiance.
For most of the Patriotes, resistance against such a force seems impossible. They retreat. But one of the Patriot leaders, Dr. Jean-Olivier Chenier, is determined to fight back. He and a few dozen men occupy the village church. General Colborne orders his artillery to fire on the Patriot stronghold. The siege is underway. The parish priest, Jacques Paquin, witnesses the cannonade.
All the cannons began firing together, battering the church with astonishing rapidity. The masonry was extremely solid and resisted a tremendous number of cannonballs as they were fired off, one after the other.
The church holds out against the cannon fire for 2 hours. At dusk, General Colburn orders a detachment of the Royal Scots to dislodge the Patriot from their fortress at all costs. Among them, Lieutenant Lysons.
We got round to the back of the church and found a small door leading into the sacristy, which we battered in. We then turned to our left and went into the main body of the church. Here, the rebels began firing down our heads. We could not get up to them, for the staircases were broken down. So Ormsby lighted a fire behind the altar and got his men out.
Father Paquin recounts the last moments of the battle.
Dr. Chenier saw that he could no longer defend himself from inside the church, for it had completely succumbed to the flames. He gathered up several of his men and jumped out of the windows with them. He was trying to escape, but he could not get out of the cemetery and was soon struck by a bullet and collapsed. He died almost immediately.
70 Patriot and 3 soldiers are dead. In the days following, soldiers and volunteers take revenge, terrorizing the county of Two Mountains. Some of the rebels try to make it to the American border, but hundreds are taken prisoner. Dr. Wilfred Nelson and the journalist Jean-Philippe Boucher-Belleville are among them. Exiled in the United States, Louis-Joseph Papineau writes to his wife, Julie.
My dear, cherished wife, in my flight, I escaped so many and such close dangers, felt such tormenting anguish at the sight of the misfortunes of my country, my family, my friends. I sometimes think, in spite of the immense disasters suffered, that Providence will one day shine on us, liberating our unfortunate country and uniting our family once again.
When your letter arrived, telling us that our future is as uncertain as the prison, I was utterly disheartened. Now that martial law has been reinstated, and that the troops to be deployed throughout the countryside have arrived, I'm terribly afraid that we are to have our share of troubles, just as we had for a good part of the winter.
In the spring of 1838, rebels and patriots tried desperately to rekindle the flame of the rebellion. They have formed a secret society known as the Hunters' Lodge and are recruiting members on both sides of the American border. They are waiting for the right moment to launch a new offensive. Papineau and Mackenzie are not part of the movement. They have renounced armed action. Meanwhile, a new Governor General arrives in Quebec, charged with a delicate mission. John George Lambton, 1st Earl of Durham, is an aristocrat, liberal, and reformer. His orders are to investigate the causes of the rebellion.
I beg you to consider me as a friend and arbitrator, ready at all times to listen to your wishes, complaints, and grievances, and fully determined to act with the strictest impartiality.
Lord Durham's first task is to decide the fate of the patriot languishing in prison. On Queen Victoria's coronation day, 150 prisoners are freed. In exchange, 8 leaders plead guilty and are exiled to Bermuda. Wolfred Nelson prepares to leave the land of his birth.
We belong to our country, and we will willingly sacrifice ourselves on the altar of her liberties. We have revolted neither against the person of Her Majesty nor her government, but against a vicious colonial administration.
Patriot leaders who have taken refuge in the United States are banished for life. In a letter to Queen Victoria, Lord Durham prides himself on having restored peace to the colony.
Not one drop of blood has been shed. The guilty have received justice, the misguided mercy. But at the same time, security is afforded to the loyal and peaceable subjects of this hitherto distracted province.
But Lord Durham's mission ends abruptly. 5 months after arriving, he returns to England. The British government has accused him of exceeding his powers by sentencing the Patriot leaders to exile without trial.
Little expected the reward I have received from home. Disavowal and condemnation. In these circumstances, I have no business here. My authority is gone. All that rests is military power. That can be better wielded by a soldier. And Sir John Colborne will no doubt do it efficiently.
As Lord Durham sails for England, a second rebellion breaks out in Lower Canada. The Hunters' Lodge attacks the manor house of the Seigneurie of Beauharnois. Inside are the seigneur's son, Edward Ellis, and his wife, Jane. She sees her captors as French revolutionaries.
My sister and I were left seated en chemise de nuit and robe de chambre, in the midst of 5 or 6 of the most ruffian-looking men I ever saw, except in my dreams of Robespierre, and without a single being to give us either advice or assistance.
But the Patriot victories are short-lived. The Hunters soon head for the border. The rekindled rebellion has been snuffed out in less than a week. In Upper Canada, the Hunters' Lodge carries out a series of raids along the American border. Fort Malden, Fighting Island, Thousand Islands, Short Hills, Prescott. But their determination is broken once and for all by a decisive defeat at Windsor. Julie Papineau has joined her husband in the United States. She writes to her son, Amédée.
You say you do not understand why this country has not risen up en masse. After all, the people were told that they would be provided with arms and money, and that a great army would come from the States. They were told 1,000 tales.
The whole region south of Montreal pays a high price for the second uprising. A Montreal Herald journalist describes the reprisals.
All the country back of La Prairie presented the frightful spectacle of a vast expanse of livid flame. It is sad to reflect on the terrible consequences of the revolt, of the irreparable ruin of so great a number of human beings, whether innocent or guilty. Nevertheless, the supremacy of the laws must be maintained inviolate, the integrity of the empire respected, and peace and prosperity assured to the English, even at the expense of the whole Canadian people.
1,000 Glengarry Highlanders, militiamen from Upper Canada, burn and pillage everything in their path. Jane Ellis, no longer a captive, is witness to the devastation.
The Glengarrys' boast is no fear of our being forgotten, for we have left a trail 6 miles broad all through the country. They seem to be a wild set of men. One of them told me that the houses they had spared in coming down the country, they would surely burn in going back.
Hundreds of rebels are convicted of high treason. In Upper Canada, 17 men are executed. In Lower Canada, 12 die on the gallows. An idealistic notary, Chevalier de Lorimier, is one of them.
I have only a few hours left to live, but I wish to share this precious time between my religious duties and those I owe my compatriots. For them I die the inglorious death of the common murderer. For them I leave behind my young children and my wife who have no means of support. And for them I die crying, "Long live freedom! Long live independence!"
Un Canadien errant, un nid de ses foyers.
More than 140 prisoners from Upper and Lower Canada are deported. In the fall of 1839, they leave Quebec for a penal colony in Australia. Inspired by the exile's fate, a young man named Antoine Gérin Lajoie writes a song that will become famous.
Si tu vois mon pays malheureux, si tu vois mon pays malheureux, va dire à mes amis que je me souviens d'eux. Va dire à mes amis que je me souviens d'eux.
(1839) is a time of despair and bitterness for both Canadas. Bad harvests have left many farmers destitute. The failure of the rebellions seems to have dashed all the reformers' hopes. The final tally paints a bleak picture. More than 200 of their comrades dead on the battlefields or on the scaffold. hundreds of others sentenced to exile. The opponents of reform have won a decisive victory. Then, in London, Lord Durham submits his report.
It is not by weakening, but strengthening the influence of the people on its government that I believe that harmony is to be restored, where dissension has so long prevailed, and a regularity and vigor, hitherto unknown, introduced into the administration of these provinces.
To everyone's astonishment, Durham accepts one of the reformers' central demands. He recommends that the governor's advisors, the men who actually run the government, should have the support of the elected assembly. In Lower Canada, he sees another, possibly more serious problem.
I expected to find a contest between a government and a people. I found two nations warring in the bosom of a single state. I found a struggle not of principles but of races. And I perceived that it would be idle to attempt any amelioration of laws or institutions until we could first succeed in terminating the deadly animosity that now separates the inhabitants of Lower Canada into the hostile divisions of French and English.
Durham proposes uniting the two Canadas so French-speaking members of Parliament will be in the minority. Assimilation, he believes, would benefit the French Canadians, a people he sees as having no history and no literature.
The language, the laws, the character of the North American continent are English, and every race but English appears there in a condition of inferiority. It is to elevate them from that inferiority that I desire to give the Canadians our English character.
London welcomes the idea of union, seeing it as a way of settling the French problem once and for all. But there will be no movement towards self-government. The reformers in British North America are bitterly disappointed. In Nova Scotia, Joseph Howe refuses to be daunted by London's decision. But for the moment, he has a more immediate problem to deal with. The Halifax elite are trying once again to silence him. This time, he won't be defending himself in court, but with a pistol in a duel.
During the political struggles in which I have been engaged, several attempts have been made to make me pay the penalty of life for the steady maintenance of my opinions. Hitherto, Providence has spared my life. This may not always be the case. I feel that I am bound to hazard my life rather than blight all prospects of being useful. If I fall, cherish the principles I have taught. Forgive my errors. Protect my children.
Howe has brashly declared that the children of the rich are no better than the apprentices in his printing shop. His words have outraged Halifax society. As the offended party, Howe's adversary, John Halliburton, takes the first shot.
All is well that ends well. I never intended to fire at him, and would not for £10,000. All that was necessary was for me to let them see that the reformers could teach them a lesson of coolness and moderation.
Thousands of miles from Halifax, two other reformers are preparing for a new political battle. Robert Baldwin is a lawyer, the son of one of Toronto's richest families. Late that autumn, Baldwin is trying to pick up the pieces of the Great Reform Project. He sends a letter that will change the course of history.
Stand back!
Baldwin proposes an alliance with the Lower Canadian Patriot. Together, they will command a reform majority in the new House of Assembly.
There is, and must be, no question of races. It were madness on one side and guilt, deep guilt on both, to make such a question. The reformers of Upper Canada are ready to make every allowance for the unfortunate state of things and are resolved, as I believe them to be, to unite with their Lower Canadian brethren cordially as friends and to afford every assistance in obtaining justice.
In Lower Canada, most of the Patriot leaders are in exile. Baldwin sends his message to one of the few men in a position to carry on the struggle, Louis Hippolyte Lafontaine.
It is in the interest of the reformers of both provinces to come together in the legislature in a spirit of peace, union, friendship, and fraternity. United action is needed now more than ever.
Lafontaine has risen from modest origins to become a prosperous lawyer and an influential politician. He sees the Union of the Canadas as a despotic act. He believes it is designed to make French Canadians a permanent minority in the new assembly. But Baldwin's letter gives him hope.
I have no doubt that the advocates of reform in Upper Canada feel the need, as we do, to join forces, and that in the first sitting of the legislature, they will show us some unequivocal evidence of this, which I hope will be the sign of a lasting and mutual bond of trust.
In 1841, the Act of Union comes into force. One colony, one governor, one assembly, one language, English. Kingston is chosen as the capital. The Reform Alliance undergoes a baptism of fire in the first election since the defeat of the rebellions. Louis Hippolyte Lafontaine is running for election in Terrebonne, a county he represented before the rebellions. But the only polling office has been placed at the entrance of a village that is mostly English. When Lafontaine and his supporters show up to vote, a mob is waiting. Lafontaine is forced into a painful decision.
And so, I informed the returning officer that, in order to avoid bloodshed and the massacre of great numbers, I was withdrawing from the contest.
Without Lafontaine in the House of Assembly, the Reform Alliance is in danger. Robert Baldwin turns to his father, who is running for office in a Toronto riding.
I think it would be very desirable that you should, though you may have already accepted the nomination for North York, suggest to them the expediency of accepting your retirement and of returning Mr. Lafontaine, if he will accept the nomination instead of you. I'm satisfied that nothing that could be done at this conjuncture would have a better effect upon the state of parties in the House than his return just now for North York.
La Fontaine accepts the offer and wins the election. A French-Canadian patriot, elected in an English riding. A year later, they win another victory when Baldwin is elected in Rimouski in the lower St. Lawrence. These gestures of goodwill strengthen the alliance between reformers from both Canadas and the personal friendship of both men. Together, Baldwin and La Fontaine lead the battle for a government run by the people's elected representatives. And in the years to come, La Fontaine can rely on Baldwin's support to restore the French language in Parliament.